Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining another edition of Trailhead Live today. My name is Mohit Srivastava. I'm a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. Welcome to today's Trailhead Live session on Salesforce Connected app. So we are on the part 4 of our deep dive into Salesforce Connected app. Before I begin, there's a forward-looking statement here. Please do make purchasing decisions based only on the current offerings of the product. All right, so let's recap what we looked into last 3 sessions. So we covered what is connected app. We explored authentication versus authorization. We touched a little bit on an overview of single sign-on, SAML 2.0, and then we looked into some of the connected app use cases. We created some connected apps. We integrated using connected apps. We also explored JWT, OAuth, JWT bearer token flows, and we also covered OpenID. So here are the connected app use cases that I want to sort of remind everyone where we are with this connected app use cases. So we explored a lot of the use cases like accessing data with API integrations, managing access to third-party apps, providing authorizations for external API gateways. So today we're going to see how we can integrate other service providers within our Salesforce environment. So if you haven't caught up on the recordings for the session, these are available at this URLs. I'll also put them into the chat. So let's look at our learning objectives for this session. So our learning objectives for this sessions are understanding SSO and SAML 2.0. And then I'll configure an SSO between two Salesforce environments. One will be identity provider and the other one will be service provider. We'll shortly see what is the identity provider versus what is service provider and all these concepts. So let's get started. Salesforce has an excellent support for identity. So that is, you can log into other applications as well as other Salesforce orgs by just using one Salesforce org as an identity provider. So a Salesforce identity solution involves configuring my domain, enabling SAML, configuring connected apps, Salesforce also provides where you can social sign on and all other capabilities. So we are going to explore them today. So before I begin, let's start with an understanding of what is single sign-on. So let's say you have 5 different applications, and today let's say you're logging into each of them with separate username and password. That's not that great experience. So with SSO, what happens is you just have only one username and password, and that is provided in your IDP, that is identity provider, and you use the same credentials to sort of access different systems without having to create different accounts in all of these systems, without you having to key in those passwords and username across all of these systems. So we will see what is single sign-on, and we'll explore some use cases here. Now, what is SAML 2.0? So SAML 2.0 is an assertion markup language. So it is a protocol. It's simply a protocol that enables single sign-on between applications. It is XML based, so it is human readable, and we'll soon explore what is service provider, what is identity provider. So service provider in simple terms is a system or the application that provides your desired service. So for example, it could be a Salesforce, it could be a Google, or it could be any other application that you access which provides service. Now, what is identity provider? So identity provider is a system or an application essentially that holds the identity information. That is, it has your user account, then it has your username and password. Now, before we sort of start exploring this IDP and start configuring all these parameters, we want to understand, what is IDP versus what is SP, and what does IDP initiated flow means, what does SP initiated flow means. So IDP initiated flow. So with this options, your end users start in your identity provider. That is, whenever they want to access some systems, they will always be in your identity provider. Now, a good example is your company might have a web page where you can sort of see all the applications sort of laid down in tile format or list format, and you can just click on the link and access any application. So that's an example of IDP, in which that web page that we are talking about here resides inside identity provider. Now let's look at what is SP initiated. So with SP initiated, your end users start from the service provider. So they are not starting from the IDP, they're starting from the service provider. So they're trying to access a service like filling up a form, or let's say in Salesforce, you're clicking a report tab to access the report. So you're starting from the service provider. Now let's say you're not authenticated, then you're redirected to the IDP where you key in the credentials, your username and password, and then that sorts of validates it and then lets you in to the system. So so here is a diagram that helps us understand what is SP initiated flow and what are the things that happen during this flow. Now, if you are using SSO today, you might not sort of notice all these things because this all happens on the back end, and it all happens pretty much in no time. So that's why it's hard to imagine that all of these things sort of takes place when you sort of go through the SP initiated flow. And we will configure, as I said, as we start working here in this session, we'll take a Salesforce org, treat that as an identity provider where we maintain the credentials, and then we will use the same credentials to sort of access the SP. So we'll look at what is SP initiated flow, what is IDP initiated flow, how we can configure all of these. Okay, so before that, I wanted to take some time to help you understand what happens in an SP initiated flow. So in an SP initiated flow, you will see that a browser is where the user tries to access the service. So what happens is, the SP sort of redirects SAML request back to browser. So SP sort of constructs this SAML request. SAML again is an XML packet, so it constructs that and then it redirects to the browser. Now, browser further relays the SAML request to the IDP. So browser uses like HTTP post, or it can also use HTTP redirect, but essentially HTTP post is more secure. So a lot of systems implement using HTTP post. So browser sort of relays SAML request to IDP, and that is where you will see that the IDP sort of generates the assertion for it and sees, if or it validates, or authenticates, it validates that, essentially the SAML request that is being sent is valid. So there is a certificate that's maintained between identity provider and service provider, and we'll see that. So it asserts that and then sends it back to the browser. Now, browser relays back the SAML assertion to the service provider. Now, if the user is authenticated, the service provider sends security context to the browser. So as seen, if the user is sort of authenticated, the SP sends the security context to the browser, and then the request resource from the SP is sort of initiated. So browser sort of asks for the resources, and then the SP sort of responds with the requested resources. So this is a SAML initiated flow, and all these, as I said, happens on the back end, and you hardly notice all of these. But the key agents here are to know what is identity provider, what is service provider, and note that the browser plays a very important role in this flow. So now, before we actually get into hands-on and see and configure, I wanted to sort of summarize what are some of the implementation parameters across both the identity provider and service provider. So note that identity provider is where your credentials are there. That's the identity that it needs to validate the SAML assertions that is coming from service provider. Service provider is where the SAML assertion sort of originates, right? So what are the things that are needed in the identity provider? So one of the things that is needed is entity ID. that will be the unique name for the SP provider. So you will see that you will need the entity ID here. And also we will need ACS, which is the assertion service URL. So where the assertion will be sent. So we will see that, you know, if we choose Salesforce, right, we'll have to configure this assertion URL. That URL will be where the assertion will be sent, and we'll see how to configure that. And then there will be attributes, and the attributes will be named ID or named ID attribute. And we'll take a look at, you know, what are these, and, you know, in short while. And then we will have relay state, which will be optional. So that is where you want your users to sort of land once the authentication sort of completes. So that also you can configure. And then, you know, optionally, to make your SAML request more secure, you can have a signing algorithm to secure your SAML. Now on the service provider, we need a certificate which is provided by IDP, so that, you know, IDP knows that the SAML request is coming from the known service provider that it recognizes. So you will see that, you know, we'll configure that in the service provider. Also, service provider needs the endpoint, an IDP endpoint, where you know, it initiates the authentication. So we will soon see that. And optionally, you can also configure a logout URL in your service provider. That means, you know, let's say service provider wants to end a logout session, it can redirect to an URL, which essentially will be a URL provided by the IDP. So it will be an IDP endpoint where, you know, the request will be posted, or SP will just redirect to that URL, and that will automatically initiate the logout. So as you can see, these are the you know, the two systems, right? So identity provider, service provider, and these are some of the parameters that we need to configure across both the systems. Now, where do connected apps sort of sits in between all of these, right? So in Salesforce, you know, when you enable Salesforce as an IDP, all these configurations that we are talking about at the IDP, like entity ID or the assertion URL, the relay state, and all the SAML configuration happens in the connected app. So connected app is sort of a bridge, you know, between Salesforce and other service providers when Salesforce is IDP. So that's why we are exploring in this session the connected apps, and we will see what are the configurations that are required at the connected app. And notice that you need that connected app only when the Salesforce sort of acts as an IDP. Now, when Salesforce acts as a service provider, we need some more configuration, and I'll show you where we can configure all those things. For example, certificate, you know, and the provider login URL, or an endpoint where, you know, IDP initiates that authentication. Okay, so let's just start you know, playing with two systems. So we will take Salesforce, one Salesforce, which will be an IDP, and let's assume that's like the core hub, and then we have spokes around it, which we can treat as other Salesforce are. So for this example, you know, I'm just treating another service provider. I'm treating a service provider as another Salesforce environment, essentially. But you know, a service provider can be anything. It can be you know, Google, it can be Workday, or any other external application, essentially. But we'll use Salesforce to play with it. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so I'm gonna use a reference here because there's so many things to configure, and, you know, I like the Salesforce documentation, which walks step by step into how we can do this. So we're gonna use this documentation as a reference to configure the SSO between Salesforce and Salesforce. And then, you know, what I'm gonna do is also reason out with each step around why we need certain things in this way, which is documented here. So let's get started. So the first thing it says is, okay, so as I said, we need an identity provider, and in this case, my identity provider is CMP Aura namespace, or, you know, my org with domain name CMP Aura will be the one that I'll be using as an IDP, because, you know, in the last session I created a Trailhead live app here, so I'm going to be using that as IDP, and we're going to use the same connected app here to configure the SAML. And then I have also another org, ebikes sf domain org, which I'm going to use as service provider. So again, I have domain sort of enabled. So let's look at the steps. So first is trying to set up one Salesforce as an identity provider, right? So by default, right, an identity provider, we will need to configure entity ID. We saw that what are the configuration parameters, right? Entity ID, the ACS URL, the attributes, the relay state, the signing algorithm, right? So here we're gonna go ahead and configure them. So I'm gonna come to the step 2. So the step 2 here says, we need to enable as identity provider. So this org will act as an identity provider. So I'm gonna come back here and enable the identity provider. So let's see, edit. So let's come back here and see if choose the certificate. So we need to choose a certificate. So let's choose a certificate. Let's create a new certificate for this. So I'm gonna say this certificate named as SFIDP. That will be the name, and save. Okay, so we have the certificate sort of created. And yeah, so identity provider, it looks like, this org is already sort of enabled as an identity provider. So Salesforce enables your org. So okay, so we go to identity provider and say enable identity provider. It looks like we already have this enabled. Okay, seems like there's already one that's enabled, so let's move on. Okay, so the next step is let's download a certificate from your identity provider. So your service provider uses this certificate to establish the trust. Okay, and so you can pick a self-signed or use a CA signed. Anyways, we will pick up the self-signed one, right? So make sure we select the one that we just created, and I'm gonna download the certificate. So I have the certificate now that we will need to import to the service provider later on. Okay, so that's all the setup with the IDP provider. So we generate the certificate. Okay, we forgot this. So we also need to sort of download the metadata XML. Okay, I see. So we just need to copy the URL. So that's the SAML discovery endpoint, basically. So this is, I think this is the what the service provider will need. It will need the login or the endpoint where it can, sort of initiate the authentication. So let's copy that URL. So I think this is the URL. Let's just copy this URL. So I'm gonna use a notepad here. Just copy it somewhere here. Maybe I just copy it here. Come back to our stuff. Okay, so now the next step is, so you can also download the metadata in case. Let's download and explore this. Allow so that we can download this. Okay, so this has the X59 certificate. Okay, it's used for signing, and then it has this URL that they asked we can copy. So notice this also has this logout URL. And what else does this has? Okay, so it has the X59 certificate key. That makes sense because it has to validate with the SP's SAML flow or with the SP's request. So, and then the single logout URL, that makes sense. And we are using name ID format here, which is unspecified at this point. Okay, so I think that's all is required from an IDP perspective. So let's move on to the SP. So now let's set up the service provider. So service provider org, we need to enable all of this, and then we'll come back to the connected app. Okay, so let's go to service provider and enable single sign-on settings for the org. So in this org, we need single sign-on settings enabled. So let's see if this is already enabled or we need to enable it. All right, so I'm gonna switch to classic. Sometimes it hangs on the same page, so I'm gonna just switch to classic so that we can complete some settings pretty quickly. Okay, so as per the docs, we need to sort of enable the we need to enable the single sign-on settings, and yeah, so we just need to enable this, and then we need to import the settings from an XML file from your identity provider, or we can use the metadata URL. Okay. Yeah, so we can use from the metadata URL, or we can use it from the metadata file. So there are different ways to do this. Okay, so let's do this. So let's go to the other tab. So I enabled, and then we have, so these are the three options they were asking us. So we can use new, and then we can manually do it, or we can do from the metadata file or from the URL. So I think I would go from metadata file because I know I have the file. So let's choose this file, create. Okay, so this actually filled in automatically the issuer for us. There's one thing that it did not fill, obviously, is the certificate. Identity provider certificate. The metadata file specifies multiple bindings for the login URL. That's fine, I just picked one of them. It's just a warning, we can ignore that. So here we'll provide the certificate as well. So request signing certificate. So we can sign this using any certificate of our choice. So let's just sign using one of the certificates here. Self-signed certificate. The entity ID is, again, this is the SP ID actually, and this we need to configure back when we look at the. Okay, so this we will configure it back. So again, service provider request binding, initiated binding, whether we want post. Usually post is more secure, so you can use redirect or post. And here identity is the name identifier element of the subject statement, or whether it is the attribute element. Now this is, so if you specify the attribute name, you have to specify which attribute. Let's just use the name identifier element of the subject. Now the assertion contains user Salesforce username, or the federation ID from the user object, or it contains the user ID from the user object. I would go with assertion contains the user's federation ID. Let's just populate the federation ID as the username, and we'll use that. And yeah, so logout request binding, we do not It's okay, we can use the post or redirect. Let's use the redirect here. Now, one of the other options that we have here is user provisioning enabled. So you can select whether you want to use the standard or you want to custom SAML with JOT, with JIT, with Apex handler. So what this feature does is sometimes the user is not provisioned, and if you want to automatically sort of provision the user, in your request when the assertion sort of completes, you can configure this. Now for this example, let's not configure this. But yeah, essentially once, let's say you don't have a user, you are registering a user for the first time and they're going through successfully an identification, and you want, after the assertion is successful from IDP, you want the user to be automatically created in the service provider. That is when you select this option. It's a pretty neat little option, saves you a lot of time if the user account do not exist in the org. Now for this example, let's assume that there is a user already in the org that we are trying to connect to. So this is like account provisioning, so it automatically provisions your user, or user provisioning or account provisioning. Okay, so one of the things that I'm not sure is the request signing certificate. So for time being, let's just use this and see. I think this is the signature that happens on the SAML request. So when the SAML request sort of goes from SP to IDP, we want to sort of sign that request. So let's assume that this is the certificate, and we'll deal with it once we configure a lot of other things. Okay, so this looks good. Let's save this. So notice a couple of things it gave. It gave us a login URL, logout URL, and the token endpoint URLs as well for the OAuth flow. And it also gives us a SAML login logout URLs, for the community. So in fact, we can use the communities as an SP, and some community user can use Salesforce as an identity provider. I mean the other org and login. Okay, so that is powerful. All right, so I think we have configured our stuff here correctly. So let's go back to the IDP and see what configurations are we left with. So we need to copy the entity ID and the identity provider login URL fields, because we will need these fields when we define the connected app on the identity provider. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to quickly copy the entity ID and the identity provider login URL. Again, it goes back to this thing, for we need this entity ID and we need this ACS URL, right? So this URL, we get it from the SP itself. So let's come back and copy this. So we need the identity provider login URL. I'm going to copy that to the notepad. Sorry. Okay, so this will be our entity ID. And then we also need to copy the entity ID. Sorry, we need the identity login URL and also the entity ID itself. Entity ID. Again, this is a unique ID, and it just populates the domain, but actually you can put anything as long as it's unique. That's about it. Okay, so I'm gonna copy that. Okay, so this was our entity ID, and this was SAML URL, SAML endpoint. Let's call that. So this one, right? So this one will be the HTTP post. Okay, so a HTTP post here. So this is our ACS, right? So this is our ACS URL. Okay. Now let's make these changes. Let's come back to the IDP and make these changes in the connected app. Close this. Okay, so here we are back into the connected app, and this is where we need to make the the changes. So I'm gonna make the changes. So connected app, so we already have the connected app. So we need to enable the SAML in the connected app. So we come back to the connected app. Let's come back to the connected app here. Just give me a sec here. Apps. Okay, so here we need to make the connected app. So here we need to enable the, okay, so this is where it will get a little tricky. So okay, so here is where we say enable. So what is the start URL? So this directs users to specific location when they run the application. Okay, so this is essentially the redirect URL. Okay, perfect. All right, so entity ID, we know the entity ID here. We definitely know, we captured it just now. So let me close this one. So entity ID is this, Rolex tab. Okay, so this is our entity ID, and then we have ACS URL. The ACS URL will be this guy. Okay, so shift tab, let's come back and configure the ACS URL. Okay, now we need the subject type. Okay, so we said it was the federation ID. That's what we said. Again, it could be custom attribute, it could be user ID, or it could be username. So we said federation ID. Here, I think we said name ID format. I think it is unspecified. Again, this is one of the specifications here of the subject. So it's a name ID format for the subject. We'll keep it as it is. Issuer. Okay, if no issuer is specified, the organization domain will be used. Let's just use the domain. IDP certificate, the certificate Salesforce uses when communicating with. Okay, so this should be the certificate that we just got it. We upload a certificate to validate signed request, encrypt SAML response. Okay, yeah, so this is where if we need to verify the SAML request, we need to upload a certificate to validate signed request. Yeah, so in our service or in our service provider, right, we also said sign the SAML certificate, right? So we signed it using RSA HA 256. So let's download this actually. Let's download the certificate. We can provide this certificate as, you know, the SAML certificate here. So I can come back here and then I can provide this. So yeah, so we provide this certificate. Yeah, this was the certificate we just downloaded. Okay, so we can optionally encrypt the SAML response. So again, you know, that adds more security. For now, let's just try and get this working with the bare bone here. So now let's just save it. Okay, so we have saved successfully. So let's see what are our next steps here. Now, okay, so now one thing we need to do here is we need to map the user identities by using the federation ID. So the federation ID should be same. So what does this mean? So this means on the user object, we have this federation ID field, and that field we need to make sure that it actually matches or it's same across both the environments here. I think we configured that behavior here when we were configuring the single sign-on settings. So we said, what did we say for that? So we said SAML identity type is Federation ID. Okay, so let's give a Federation ID here. So I'm gonna go back here and give a Federation ID to my user. So let's go and say, so there will be a field called Federation ID here. Search for Federation ID here. Okay, so my Federation ID will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's use that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's my Federation ID here. And we need the same Federation ID. That could be like an employee ID in typical scenarios, or a unique ID. It could also be email, so. Okay, so, and this is where I think one of the settings there in the identity when we were configuring the connected app is what format it has to be. We can strictly select the format. Anyway, so did we say 1, 2, 3, 4? What was that? So our Federation ID here was Federation ID was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Alright, so that's gonna be our Federation ID. So we save it. So the Federation IDs are now matching. So manage on the connected app and select profiles and permissions. Okay, so that's also required. So let's just whitelist the permissions. Okay, so let's go back and try to manage the connected app. I think we have whitelisted for, let's go back to our apps, go back to our app manager, and then go back to the connected app, and then manage. Okay, perfect. All right, so we go to manage profiles and we see system admins is already listed, so we should be good. And you can see, we have the option to download the metadata here. We have the IDP initiated login URL. We have the SP initiated. We have the metadata discovery endpoint. Everything comes right here. So that makes it really easy to work with it. Okay. All right. So now the next step is, so this lists the new service provider. Yep. So which can be done with, Now test the SSL implementation. So create a test user in your identity provider, set the Federation ID to unique. I think we did that. Create a test user in your service provider and okay, we did that. Now we log out from both the URLs, and then we enter the domain URL of the identity provider, right? And we log into the URL as the test user. Now enter the URL of the service provider, for example. Okay, so first we will do the service provider initiated flow. That is, I'm in the service provider and we will see how the browser sort of redirects us back to the IDP. So that would be interesting to see. So let's check. All right, so okay, so we am gonna log out of this. So I'm gonna log out of, so before that I need to copy the domain. So let's copy the domain and I'm gonna log out of this org. Completely log out. Should be logged out now. Perfect. Now I'm gonna log in. So I'm gonna log in and I know the okay, so now it should actually log in. Okay, so we missed something here because the moment we type this, it should allow us to sort of log in from the other org. Okay, I see. Okay, so first we need to log in to the IDP. Okay, we'll come back how we can log in from the, how we can log in directly from the service provider, and how it redirects to the. So first, let's do this IDP initiated one. So let's do the IDP initiated one first. So for that, again, I need to copy this. Okay, so I'm gonna use an incognito mode and just try to. Okay, we need both the URLs here. So let me just copy the. So this is again this is SP service provider, and this one is IP. This one is IP. Okay, so let's first use the IP and login. So I'm gonna use. So I know the credentials login. Okay, I need access to my phone so that I can, or I might have. Okay, here you go. Alright, so I logged in. Okay, now I'm gonna key in the service provider URL and let's see what happens. So the service provider URL is this one. I'm gonna key in the same browser. Okay, it should have ideally redirected. Okay, let me use the credentials of the same credentials that I had. Okay, there's something that is missing here. Okay, so let's just try again. So what's the domain for this? My domain. I think I copied the domain. Okay, so here is where I did some mistake. It has to be not the Lightning domain. It has to be the IP domain here. So let's take a shot here. Let's log out. Let's not use incognito. Okay, so yep. Login. Okay, logged in. Now I'm gonna use. Alright, so the next step is this has to be HTTPS, by the way. So SP domain. Okay. Okay. So new tab. It did not redirect. Let's see, did we miss something? Okay, let's look at the settings on the connected app once more. So it looks like, okay, so on the connected app, what does the ACS URL? So the ACS URL entered the saved endpoint login URL. Okay, so what's the saved endpoint login URL? Okay, and alright, so I think I have messed up a bit. I think instead of using the login URL, I have the identity provider URL on my connected app. So let's go ahead and fix that actually. So let me go to my app manager and bring up the Trailhead Live and essentially edit this. Like I have this ACS URL incorrect. So this, remember, this has to be equal to, the ACS URL has to be equal to what is there in the saved identity provider login URL. So it has to be the login URL here. Okay, so I think that's the issue. So let me come back and change this. So I'm gonna zoom a bit so it's easier to view. So entity ID, ACS URL. Now this looks much correct. Fine, so let's just save this. And now if I go to manage, and I should see, we should see the ACS URL correctly. Now we can test this thing. So we can test this by just logging out of this. I want to log out of this org, and I can test it by doing an IP initiator login URL. So you get an IP initiator login URL. So this link should directly log me in to the other org. So notice the domain here, it should log me in directly to the other org. So let's give a shot. There you go. So as you can see, I'm directly sort of logged in by clicking on this link, and notice the redirection that happens at the URL. Okay, so that seems to be working. So that's IDP initiated flow for you, where you're in the IDP and you want to log into the service provider. So you click on a link and you are directly logging into the IDP URL. We can also do one more thing here. So we can populate the start URL. So the start URL is where it will log us directly from an app. So let's put a start URL here of our e-bikes app here. Let's say I want to put a start URL here. Let's just save it. Okay, so once you sort of put your start URL, you should see an application here. The connected app you should see here. And once I click on that, it should let me in directly to the URL that I wanted to log in. Now I can switch back to Lightning, and it should directly let me in from here. There you go. So that is IDP initiated. Now what about SP initiated? So for SP initiated, we need to do a change here. So we need to come to my domain here. Let's go back to the my domain, and we need to make sure that we select the authentication service. So now when I save, you see that I also have an option for this. So let's say I'm logged out. Let's just log out of here. So let's say I'm just will come and fix this error, but let's see what happens here when I. So this time, as you can see, I can log in now with my other account, with my IDP account. So this is SP initiated, where I click on this, it takes me to the service provider logged in, and since I'm already logged in, it just let me in. Now imagine if I was logged out from here. Let's imagine that I was logged out. Now notice what happens. So let's just also log out from here. Before that, I want to copy the URL. Okay, so now if I try to just log in, you see this option. Now it will take me to a login screen where I can use the IDP's credential to just log me in. There you go. So that's about it. Now let's fix the logout behavior. So the logout behavior that we want is it should log out, not show us this error. So again, as I said, it actually goes to the logout URL. So we need to configure that logout URL from the SP. So if we are in our service provider here, let's go to single sign-on settings. Oh, I'm logged out. Let me log back in. me log back in through my actual login, and let's go back and look at our single sign-on settings. So in our single sign-on settings here, one of the things we have is we have the logout URL. So we have the logout URL. So this has to be provided as well in the connected app. So let's log into our identity provider org, and let's actually go to, sorry, not here, we go to the connected app. Go to apps actually. So from the app manager, let's find the connected app. Now from here, I need to go back and fix my logout behavior. So I say enable logout URL, it'll be HTTP redirect, and I need to make sure that I have a single logout URL. Let's see the logout URL. There you go. Okay, perfect. I think that should work. And let's actually save the behavior. Single logout URL binding provided. Save this. Okay. So now let's see what happens when I log out. So log out. There you go. It perfectly logs me out. Yeah, and then I can log in directly by clicking on this link. And since I'm already logged in, as you can see, that lets me in. So that's SP initiated. While for IDP initiated, you saw there's this neat little URL that will let me in directly to the application, the other applications. So that wraps up how we can configure SSO between two Salesforce environment, and really, between any two systems, where Salesforce is involved as an IDP or SP, the configurations are going to be same with little modifications here and there. And we have a documentation where you can actually get a lot of the configurations for different systems and sites. So there's a comprehensive documentation where it sort of shows you for different systems. Let's see. So there is a comprehensive documentation here on the help site, which shows which shows how you can configure these settings for different providers. Similarly, that happens with SAML as an identity. There are examples, and this is what I was talking about. There are examples configuring SSO with Salesforce as the identity provider for different providers here, whether it's WebEx or Workday or Zendesk. So we have clear-cut documentation on how to do it, which seems very handy for the references. Okay. All right. So that also winds up the series here, the 4-part series on Salesforce Connected apps. And I want to take some time to thank you. Thanks for being part of the Ohana community. And if you have any feedback about the connected apps and the series or any other sessions, please do reach out to me via my Twitter handle at mkivastav30. Thank you again, and see you next time.